As teachers, we do everything we can to help our students be successful in the classroom. Now, three things that we do and three terms that we use often as educators are these: differentiation, accommodation, and modification. So it's important that we understand how these can be utilized to help our students, but also understand the similarities and differences between these terms. So let's start with this: differentiated instruction or differentiation. This is the broad term, the overarching term that encompasses all of the small adjustments or tailored instruction or tailored assessment that we provide to individual students or groups of students that need something just a little different. For example, we might, for an individual student or groups of students, tailor our instruction so that students can gain access to the content or to the process of learning. Or we might even change the learning environment just a little bit, or give them an opportunity to demonstrate their understanding in a way that's slightly different from the rest of the class. When we make these small adjustments for our students, we call this differentiated instruction. Now, when we're talking about students who have an IEP, students that are on a 504 plan, so think of our students with special needs or other students that have documentation that requires us as teachers to provide very specific changes or adjustments to how we deliver instruction or how our students demonstrate understanding. This is when we start to use these terms: accommodation and modification. So again, these small changes or adjustments that we make to the content, process, to the learning environment, or how they demonstrate it. When we're talking about students who have an IEP or a 504, we use the term accommodation. And we do this because it encourages us as teachers to make sure that we're providing what legally needs to be provided based on what is on a document that has been agreed upon by the teacher, the parents, and all other team members involved. Now, if we don't make any large sweeping changes, if we're just making small adjustments about how students go about it or how we provide instruction, we call that an accommodation. We only use the term modification really to describe large changes in what students are working towards, say a learning goal. For example, let's say that the majority of the students in the classroom are working on a fourth grade learning goal geared towards the standards in mathematics at a fourth grade level. But I have a student who is working closer at a first to maybe a second grade mathematical goal. If this student is working towards a completely different learning goal than his or her peers, we call that a modification, a larger change to not only how students are learning, but what they are learning about and working towards. So again, differentiated instruction is the overarching approach that we use to tailor our instruction for all of our students, those who are covered with an IEP or a 504 plan, or who are not, anytime we tailor or make adjustments. But again, when we talk about students who have an IEP or a 504 plan, we start to use these terms accommodation and modification. Accommodation for different ways that we tailor their instruction and assessment, and modification for when they're actually working towards a different learning goal that's different from their peers. So if we look at all these terms stacked up one on top of another, this is what we see. We see differentiation is tailoring instruction and or assessment to meet individual needs. This is going to focus on how we teach our students as well as how they demonstrate understanding. For example, we might have a social studies teacher who wants her students to understand the impact of Lewis and Clark's expedition on shaping America. So she might present it in different ways, maybe for the whole class and then for a particular group that needs a little bit of added instruction. Then she might also provide different opportunities for students to demonstrate understanding in varied ways. Now, if we're talking about a student who is covered with an IEP or a 504, then we're going to start using the terminology accommodation. We might be providing very specific changes that don't fundamentally alter what they're working towards, but it does provide them access to the curriculum because they need this as well as it's documented that we need to provide this. For example, we might provide a student with a sign language interpretation or interpreter. We might allow him or her to provide oral responses instead of a written response. And why would we do this? Well, because it allows our students access to the curriculum, helps us to gauge to what degree they understand or can perform the process that we're working on, but also because it's required or mandated by an individualized education plan or a 504 plan. Now, when we're having our students actually working towards different things than their peers, when we're making fundamental changes in the curriculum, okay, this is when we're talking about modification. So again, if that fourth grade student is actually working on a second grade learning goal instead of a fourth grade, or if the learning goal is to complete 20 multiplication problems with automaticity, and this particular student we modify to what degree they have to demonstrate that, maybe with 6 to 8 problems. If they're working on something fundamentally different than their peers, that's when we call it a modification.